I spent the night with a random guy during our anniversary trip, and my husband flew back home, leaving me behind. I've messed up really badly, and it feels like I'm trapped in this chaotic situation. If anyone has faced similar challenges, please lend a hand, as I have no idea how to untangle this mess. I'm a 35-year-old woman, and I've been married to my 37-year-old husband for 3 years. He works in a software company, while I work as an office clerk in a school. We don't have any children. We initially met on Tinder around 5 years ago, started casually dating, and eventually became exclusive when we realized our feelings for each other were genuine. Our relationship was enjoyable, and after 2 years of dating, we decided to tie the knot. Since we were already living together, marriage didn't bring about significant changes. I had hoped that our married life would be smooth sailing, but I couldn't have been more wrong. After 2 years of marriage, we began experiencing problems unlike the typical couple's disagreements. These were serious issues. It all began with minor annoyances, like him leaving his wet towel on the bed or me coming home late from work. Initially, I thought these were normal relationship hiccups that every couple goes through. But the real problem was that we didn't effectively resolve these issues. They piled up and escalated. I vividly recall an incident when my husband didn't return home until well past midnight. I had been waiting for him with dinner and tried calling him, but he didn't answer. I grew increasingly worried. When he finally arrived after midnight, I asked him where he had been. He casually mentioned that a meeting had run late, and he had dinner with his colleagues from the office. I expressed my frustration, mentioning that he could have at least informed me, as I had been waiting for him at home with dinner like a fool. He told me he was sorry, but his demeanor didn't reflect any genuine remorse. Instead, he seemed eager to wrap up the conversation and head to bed. I grew genuinely upset and decided to stop talking to him. We went without communication for an entire week, and I expected him to initiate a conversation and make amends. However, when he did attempt to talk to me after a couple of tries, it felt insincere. He soon ceased his efforts and casually mentioned that he'd be available when I was ready to talk. His lack of effort weighed heavily on me. Despite my reservations, I eventually resumed communication with him, though my discontent still lingered. It seemed like he no longer cared about our marriage. Initially, I suspected he might be involved with someone else secretly, but my investigations yielded no evidence of infidelity. Instead, it appeared that he was losing interest in our marriage. This was hard to accept, considering the same man who used to go to great lengths to be with me. During our dating days, he would pick me up for dinner right after work, but now even a simple phone call seemed like too much of a hassle for him. I grew weary of this lackluster relationship, especially as our intimacy dwindled. One morning during breakfast, I confronted him, stating that if he no longer wanted to be with me, there was no reason for us to continue. I was prepared to remove myself from his life for good. This declaration seemed to finally strike a chord with him. He expressed his love for me, apologized for the pain he had caused, and pledged to rectify the situation. I asked him how he planned to do that, considering our strained communication and growing distance, despite living together under the same roof. He proposed that we needed quality time together and suggested taking a trip for our upcoming 3rd wedding anniversary. He believed it would serve as a way to celebrate the occasion and provide us with a break from our everyday responsibilities. After considering his words, I found merit in his idea. I sensed that the growing differences between us stemmed from our neglect of our relationship. Instead of dedicating quality time to each other, we became preoccupied with various other matters. Romantic conversations between us had become scarce, replaced by discussions about utility bills, groceries, and similar practical concerns. While these topics were important, they should not have taken precedence over our relationship. At the suggestion of my husband, I considered that perhaps some time away from these distractions might be beneficial. I expressed my agreement with the idea of taking a trip, and he enthusiastically encouraged me to choose our destination. He assured me that he would promptly handle all the arrangements. For the first time in months, a genuine smile graced my face, and the one he returned to me was equally heartfelt. It had been a while since he had smiled at me in such a way, and that day, I began to entertain the hope that our situation might not be as dire as I had initially believed. My anticipation for the upcoming trip grew, and I immediately embarked on researching potential destinations. After extensive research, I settled on Bali as our destination. Given that both of us had an affinity for beaches, and Bali boasted some of the most stunning ones, it appeared to be the perfect choice. I eagerly awaited my husband's return from work to discuss the idea. Everything seemed to have taken a 180-degree turn in our relationship. What was once a source of distress had now transformed into excitement. I broached the subject of Bali with my husband, and he shared my enthusiasm, committing to making all the necessary arrangements. After several months of estrangement, intimacy returned to our relationship that night, igniting a sense that our challenging phase might soon come to an end. I began preparing for our trip, which was slated to last a week. We had both taken time off work to fully enjoy our vacation, and when the day arrived, we departed for Bali. The lengthy 22-hour journey left me feeling exhausted upon our arrival. To my surprise, my husband had booked a luxurious suite for us at a high-end resort in New Baud. My excitement soared, and we once again shared intimate moments. However, before long, I noticed his waning interest. Concerned, I asked him what was troubling him and why he was acting distant, but he brushed it off, attributing it to jet lag and the need for rest after our lengthy flight. We decided to take some rest before embarking on our planned exploration of the scheduled attractions. I had meticulously prepared a detailed itinerary to ensure we had a wonderful time during our stay. The following day, we visited Lavina Beach, renowned for its beauty. Our resort had thoughtfully arranged for a taxi throughout our stay. However, my husband began exhibiting the same aloofness he had displayed in recent months. He seemed disinterested, either engrossed in his phone or maintaining a stony silence. My attempts at conversation were met with vague or monosyllabic responses. I speculated that perhaps he needed time to adjust to the new environment, hoping that his indifference might fade over our week-long stay. Upon returning to our resort, he retired to bed, claiming to have a headache. Another day followed in the same fashion. While we explored Bali, my husband continued to exhibit a lack of interest, both in me and in the surroundings. We appeared as two people merely accompanying each other on a vacation. Finally, our anniversary arrived, yet his behavior remained unchanged. Our plan was to explore Ubud, renowned for its arts and crafts in Bali. I had chosen this thinking it would align with my husband's interests. Throughout our time together, he had consistently shown a keen interest in arts and crafts. Whenever he traveled, he would often return with craft items. I had hoped that delving into this artistic world would brighten his mood, but my hopes were dashed. His demeanor remained unchanged. Instead of drawing closer during this trip, we seemed to be growing more distant. I had donned a beautiful paisley dress, specifically chosen for our anniversary. However, my husband barely glanced at me, let alone offered a compliment or initiated a conversation. That day, a whirlwind of emotions washed over me, including hurt, dejection, and frustration. I couldn't comprehend why my husband had brought us to Bali if he had no intention of engaging with me. He had been the one to suggest this trip, and now his distant behavior left me deeply wounded. My emotions spiraled out of control, reaching a breaking point. I had grown weary of his irrational behavior. The moment we returned to our suite, I confronted him, demanding to know what was troubling him. When he began offering the same flimsy excuses he'd been giving throughout the trip, my anger escalated rapidly. I unleashed a tirade, berating him for taking me for granted. His temper flared in response. He argued that nothing he did seemed to satisfy me. Despite arranging our impromptu trip to Bali, I was shouting at him instead of showing appreciation. Our voices rose in a heated exchange. Eventually, he stormed out of the room, expressing a need for space. I didn't try to stop him. Left alone, I lay in bed, attempting to sleep. However, sleep eluded me as the earlier argument replayed in my mind. The more I dwelled on it, the more tears welled up. Sleep became an unattainable goal. Meanwhile, my husband remained absent from the suite. Deciding it was better to leave the large, empty room than stay there alone, I ventured to a nearby bar. Although we had visited the resort's bar a few days prior, I sought a change of scenery that night. I dressed up, refreshed my makeup, and made my way to a bar I had noticed earlier. The establishment exuded a cozy atmosphere, with numerous couples dancing and some engaged in passionate embraces on the dance floor. I settled at the bar and ordered a gin and tonic. The drink helped soothe my frayed nerves, offering a welcome respite from the earlier frustration. I ordered another drink as I tried to take in the ambiance. Seated beside me was a foreigner, a man slightly older than myself. At first, I didn't pay much attention to him, engrossed in scrolling through Instagram on my phone. After quickly finishing my drink, the stranger struck up a conversation with me. He suggested I try a rock shot, a traditional Balinese liquor made from fermented white rice and coconut palm flowers. Intrigued, I decided to give it a try. The shot arrived, and I downed it, finding it quite potent. The alcohol served to relax me, and I began chatting with the stranger. He introduced himself as a solo traveler in Bali, which resonated with my own experience due to my husband's demeanor throughout the trip. As we conversed, I indulged in more rock shots, laughing and engaging with this newfound acquaintance at the bar. At that moment, all thoughts of my husband faded into the background. I can't quite recall the exact details that followed, but I distinctly remember the stranger proposing that we go to his Airbnb together, and something within me led to us sharing a kiss at the bar. I have a hazy recollection of agreeing and going to his villa. Although the details are somewhat blurry, I distinctly remember entering his room and removing my dress. I wish I could erase the memory of sleeping with a stranger on my anniversary trip. I'm fully aware that I messed up by engaging with a stranger during our anniversary getaway. I'm aware I made a terrible mistake, but I can't comprehend what possessed me that night. The following morning, I was abruptly awakened by loud knocks on the door. The combination of the pounding and my hangover made me feel like I was on the verge of death. I hastily put on my dress and opened the door without checking who was on the other side. I was taken aback when I saw my husband standing there, his face flushed with anger. Fear surged through me at the sight of him. He entered the villa and made his way to the bedroom. His anger intensified upon discovering a naked man in the bed. He erupted into a furious tirade, accusing me of infidelity. This commotion roused the man from the bar, who appeared bewildered by the unfolding situation. He inquired about what was happening, but neither my husband nor I responded. My husband's rage escalated and he struck the man on the jaw. The man staggered backward, but my husband continued to pummel him while shouting not to touch his wife. I was petrified but couldn't stand by while this man was beaten for a mistake I had made. I intervened, positioning myself between them and pushing my husband away from the man. My actions only fueled my husband's anger further. I suggested that we leave the scene and return to our resort. Though his eyes were still filled with rage, he reluctantly agreed. We made our way back to the resort, and during the entire journey, my husband regarded me with a seething hatred that I could scarcely bear. Upon arriving at the resort, my husband slammed the cab door with such force that even the cab driver appeared alarmed. I followed him, understanding that his anger was justified, but I couldn't comprehend what had come over me last night. I had never felt so vulnerable before. In our room, I pleaded with my husband to listen to me, but my words fell on deaf ears. He began to toss objects around, shattering everything that had adorned the shelves as decorations. His shouts about how I could do this to him only fueled his growing rage. A call from the resort's front desk interrupted the tumult, as nearby guests grew concerned. This intervention had a calming effect on my husband. He disliked creating scenes. He ceased his shouting and the destruction of property, but his anger still smoldered. He started packing his belongings, and when I questioned his actions, he replied that if he had to look at my face any longer, he might do something drastic to me or the other man. He was leaving and going back. I implored him not to go, but my pleas fell on deaf ears. His hatred for me had consumed him to the point where nothing else mattered. Shortly after, he left me alone, telling me he didn't want to see my face, so I shouldn't bother returning home. I spent the entire day crying, reflecting on and regretting my actions. Any hope of reconciling our relationship had been obliterated by my own actions. It was devastating to realize that I had destroyed our relationship with my own hands. The loathing I saw in my husband's eyes was tearing me apart. After spending the entire day in bed sobbing, I eventually decided to return home. Staying alone at the resort seemed pointless. I called the hotel front desk and arranged for a flight ticket back home as soon as possible. The next day, I arrived at the airport for my flight back home. The hotel staff had questioned my decision, as urgent flight tickets were quite expensive, costing over $2,000, and our room had already been paid for the entire week. Refunds weren't an option, and I affirmed my decision to leave. Staying alone at the resort no longer made sense. The trip had yielded the opposite of my expectations, and I found myself in a mess. The journey back home took over 24 hours, during which I felt anxious and frustrated, leading to bouts of vomiting. By the time I reached the airport, I was mentally and physically exhausted. Despite my desire to return home and reconcile with my husband, I lacked the energy for it. Instead, I chose the easier path and moved in with my parents, who conveniently lived in the same city. Given that my husband had already told me not to come home, and I lacked the strength to plead for his forgiveness at that point, I decided to give him some space. I planned to gather my thoughts and regain my energy before facing him and figuring out how to appease his anger. At my parents' house, I slept through the first 2 days, but my health showed no improvement. Frequent episodes of vomiting and nausea persisted, prompting my mother to suggest seeing a doctor. I agreed and visited our regular doctor, informing her about my fever and vomiting. Her question about my last menstruation took me by surprise, as I hadn't even considered the possibility of being pregnant. My irregular menstrual cycles had led me to dismiss this possibility. After sharing all the details with the doctor, she recommended a pregnancy test, which could be done either at home or in the hospital, with the latter option being more reliable. I opted for the hospital test. As I went through the procedure instructed by the nurse, anxiety flooded my mind. I couldn't recall whether I had used a rubber with the stranger, and I had no means of contacting him. My heart raced as I contemplated the consequences of a positive result. How would I face my husband? I didn't have to wait long for the results. The hospital sent my reports by that evening, revealing that I was pregnant. The shock hit me hard, as it felt like my world was crumbling. Tears welled up in my eyes when I noticed something else in the report. I was 4 weeks pregnant, which meant the child was my husband's. Memories of the night he suggested our trip flooded back, a night I had forgotten. We had become intimate after a long while, and although I was on birth control pills because we didn't want a baby, I must have forgotten to take them. It suddenly made sense why my emotions were so heightened during our trip. It was due to my pregnancy. I hoped that this news might lead to my husband forgiving me now that we were going to become parents. I kept wishing for reconciliation and a chance to move forward from my mistake. I chose not to immediately inform my parents about the pregnancy, believing it was only fair for my husband to be the first to know. That evening, I went to our house with my luggage, but to my surprise, the door wouldn't open with the passcode. I wondered if my husband had changed the locks. Frantically, I called him, but his phone was busy, which was unusual for him. I grew confused and questioned whether he had blocked me, with uncertainty about what to do next. I waited outside our house for an hour, hoping he would either answer my call or return home. When neither happened, I returned to my parents' house. I lacked the energy to explain everything to them, so I made up an excuse, claiming my husband had gone somewhere, and I didn't want to stay alone. I knew they didn't fully buy my explanation, but they chose not to press further and allowed me to be as I wished. So that's the summary of what has transpired in my life over the past few months. I acknowledge it's an unusual situation, but it's my reality, and I'm unsure about my next steps. My husband refuses to communicate with me, and I'm unable to return to my house, all while carrying our unborn child. I'm at a loss for words to soothe his anger. If anyone has any suggestions, please share. Thank you for listening thus far. An update. It has been 4 months since I shared my story. Before I delve into what unfolded afterward, I want to express my gratitude to all the kind people who commented and supported me. Your kindness means the world to me. The morning after my return to my parents' house, I had a scheduled appointment with my gynecologist. Knowing my husband would likely be at the office, as he was the type to go even with a high fever, I decided to meet him first and then proceed to the gynecologist. My hope was that after revealing my pregnancy, he would accompany me to the doctor. When I encountered my husband, his anger had intensified, surpassing his previous state. Although he didn't raise his voice, the intensity of his anger was palpable in his eyes, sending shivers down my spine. Fear gripped me once more. He pulled me aside on his office floor, gripping my arms rather tightly, and demanded to know why I was there. I explained that I had come to meet him. His response was far from welcoming. He expressed his hatred towards me and instructed me to stay away from him. Despite the hurtful words, I mustered the courage to reveal the truth. I told him I was pregnant. What unfolded next still haunts me. He laughed at me, suggesting I should go back to Bali and inform that man. He believed the man from that night was the father of this child. As painful as it was to hear, I knew I had brought this upon myself. I clarified that I was 4 weeks pregnant, emphasizing that he was the father. My words seemed to momentarily stun him, but he quickly regained his composure and uttered even more hurtful words. He declared that he couldn't trust the words of a woman who could sleep with anyone. Tears streamed down my face as I pleaded that I was still his wife, hoping he would believe me. He continued to laugh, unmoved by my tears, and insisted that he had made a mistake marrying a woman of questionable character, vowing to rectify his error. He informed me of his intention to divorce me, despite the fact that I was carrying his child. I repeatedly tried to convey to him the importance of considering the well-being of our unborn child before making any hasty decisions. I pleaded with him to forgive my one mistake and suggested that we could move past it. I emphasized that he shouldn't abandon his own child. His response shattered me. He callously stated that he didn't care and suggested I could choose to abort the child or take any action I pleased, displaying an icy indifference. I was left standing there, feeling frozen in shock. He then instructed me to leave his office premises immediately and never return. Before I departed, he mentioned that his lawyers would soon contact me regarding the divorce proceedings. I left his office in tears and proceeded to see my gynecologist. She conducted my checkup and prescribed some medication. I inquired about the potential effects of the alcohol I had consumed before I was aware of the pregnancy. She reassured me that the baby was in good health and advised me to be cautious moving forward. I didn't broach the topic of abortion with my gynecologist because I was determined to keep the child. At 35 years old, my biological clock was ticking, and my husband's harsh words in the morning would likely change once he calmed down. During the car ride from the gynecologist to my parents' house, I shared the news of my pregnancy with my mother and mentioned the intense argument my husband and I had. I asked if I could stay with them for a few more days. Deep down, I knew I would eventually have to confide in my mother about everything, but a glimmer of hope remained that my husband might come and take me back. I resumed going to work, and I made numerous attempts to call my husband throughout the day, but his phone was always busy. He had blocked my calls for good. As weeks passed, my hope began to wane. Then one day my call actually went through, and he answered. Hearing his voice, I couldn't hold back my tears, and I profusely apologized. I implored him to grant me another chance, assuring him that I would do whatever it took to earn his forgiveness. He listened, and for the first time, it seemed like he was genuinely considering it. He expressed uncertainty about whether he could trust me again. Despite his guarded response, I clung to a glimmer of hope. It marked the first substantial conversation we had had in a long time. I vowed to work tirelessly to regain his trust and forgiveness, but he didn't say much before ending the call. After work that day, instead of going to my parents' house, I decided to visit his place. I rang the doorbell, noticing his car in the parking lot, confirming he was home. When he opened the door, he seemed surprised to see me. I entered and embraced him, and he allowed the hug. Tears streamed down my face, and he comforted me as I repeatedly expressed my remorse and determination to make things right. He attentively listened and then kissed me. I responded to his kiss, and he led me to the bedroom. I followed willingly, and we became intimate that night. I believed that our relationship was on the mend after that night. The following morning, he suggested that I retrieve my belongings from my parents' house and move in with him so that he could take care of both me and our baby. His words stirred my emotions once again, but this time with hope. Everything seemed to be falling back into place. He accompanied me to my parents' house, helped me pack, and we returned home together. He assisted with unpacking, and I felt an immense sense of happiness that had been absent for a long time. He took care of me diligently, showing love and tenderness every night as he led me to bed, and we continued to be intimate. Given that I was only 10 weeks pregnant, it was perfectly safe. About 4 or 5 days after my return home, my husband mentioned that we hadn't had a chance to properly celebrate my pregnancy due to the earlier turmoil. I didn't fully grasp what he meant, so he explained that the circumstances hadn't allowed for a proper celebration. I agreed with him, acknowledging the chaos that had surrounded us. I proposed a simple dinner celebration, but he had grander plans in mind, wanting to mark the occasion in a significant way since it was our first child. He decided to throw a party during the week to announce the pregnancy to friends and family in style, assuring me that everything would be perfect, and I need not worry about any details. True to his word, he took charge of organizing the event, handling the catering and inviting our loved ones. I was genuinely excited about the upcoming party, feeling like we were finally emerging from the dark phase in our relationship. On the day of the party, however, I couldn't shake a growing sense of anxiety, as if something might go wrong. Despite my unease, I prepared for the event, hoping for the best. As the guests began to arrive, I realized that apart from my parents, nobody was aware of my pregnancy. My husband had insisted on announcing it at the party, even though he had informed everyone that we were celebrating our 3rd wedding anniversary. When I heard it, it triggered a painful memory, but I chose to suppress it, believing that things would eventually get better. The party was proceeding smoothly, with everyone laughing and enjoying themselves. My anxiety began to dissipate, and I thought I had been overly worried. I was starting to relax and enjoy the event when everything unraveled. My husband gathered everyone's attention, indicating that he had an announcement to make. I smiled, expecting him to reveal my pregnancy, but his announcement left me breathless once more. He began by mentioning that our actual anniversary had occurred 2 months earlier, and recounted how he had taken me to Bali for that celebration. He proceeded to share details about our anniversary trip, explaining how he had arrived at the resort and found our room empty, leading him on a search to locate me. He described how, with the help of our shared location, he had discovered me in an Airbnb with a stranger. I kept my eyes closed as he disclosed my secret to everyone, realizing there was no point in attempting to stop the revelation. The room fell into a hushed silence as my husband exposed my indiscretion to everyone I knew. Unable to meet anyone's gaze, I tried to flee the room, but my husband prevented me, gripping my hands and guiding me to the center of the living room. He maintained a composed demeanor, stating that he couldn't give me my Bali anniversary trip, so he had chosen to do it today. He handed me an envelope, and I had no doubt about its contents. Following that, I rushed to our bedroom and wept profusely. My husband followed me there, and I implored him to explain his actions. He admitted that he sought revenge for what I had done to him. He revealed that our recent intimate nights together had been part of his scheme to exact vengeance. He wanted everyone to be aware of the kind of person he believed I had become, which is why he orchestrated the entire ordeal. That night, I was utterly heartbroken. I left his house and sought refuge at my parents' home. My mother informed me that my father didn't want to see me. She suggested it would be best for me to spend some time away. I managed to secure a hotel room with the limited savings I had. I lived in that hotel for several days until I was able to secure a small studio apartment for myself. I couldn't face anyone, not even at work, as everyone knew about my mistake in Bali. In different circumstances, I might have considered leaving my job, but I couldn't afford to do so. I had to take care of not only myself, but also the child I would soon be welcoming into the world. My husband hasn't spoken to me since that night. All my communication through him has been through his lawyers. My divorce process with my husband is going on. It's taking some time as there are a few complications about me being pregnant and all. My husband had said that he does not want any parental rights or want to be associated with the baby in any way. There are separate legal issues going on as to how he doesn't want the burden of child allowances, and in return, he'll forsake his parental rights. We haven't spoken to each other after that night. All my communication through him has been through his lawyers. My father had not spoken to me after that day. He had said that because of me, he is shameful and cannot look at me without disgust. I stopped trying to contact him after that, and neither visited their house again. The only person I tried to contact is my husband. I told him that he can divorce me, but to not abandon his child. I told his lawyers that the child is going to need their father, but they said my husband had told them clearly that he doesn't want anything to do with me or the child. The words hurt, but it didn't surprise me. After everything that has happened, this was quite expected of him. I'm currently 5 months pregnant. My bump has started showing. Everyone at work gives me looks, no doubt wondering whose child this is. It seems to everyone that I conceived this child in Bali since my husband is forsaking his parental rights. I don't know how to explain to everyone that this is the child of my husband only. I feel so confused right now and don't know what to do. I just hope that everything gets better, if not for me, then for this child.
All right, everyone's presentations are done. Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! Is something wrong? Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my second year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. "I will do my best." Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. "Did you not hear what I said?" "I'm sorry." I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, "I'm thirsty." Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children, with zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job, having joined the company wanting to do customer service. "I don't care what they say, I plan to quit anytime," he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look, "To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day." Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. "So, you all get a chance." As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. "Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them." It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. "All right, everyone's presentations are done." "Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something." Nick interrupted me. "There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer." He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. "Nick! What's wrong?" Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself, had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I obediently followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was. As the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. What kind of training are you giving your subordinates? Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed. I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, "I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong." Mike! What have you done? Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. "I didn't do anything wrong." "You're still saying that? Look at him." Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. "I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract?" Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. "Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go." Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. "Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him." There's no way he was pushed aside. "Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he?" I don't remember that part." I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself. This could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.